Coming up in this fin cast, we'll be re-rocking an 8,000-gallon reef system. Hey everybody, John here with another FinCast, and today we are taking on an enormous project. Behind me is the 8,000-gallon reef system at Center in the Square. It's a museum in downtown Roanoke, Virginia. We're going to do some work on this reef. It's been in place for about 10 years, but there have been some issues with it that we haven't liked, and we want to build the reef up a little bit. Ben will talk about that here in just a second. But we're going to have a diver in the tank today, and we've been curing rock for about 6 months in the system. So we have a major, all day long at least, project in front of us, and you're going to see some amazing differences in this reef system before the day is over.
Okay, so ever since we set up the big reef here at Center in the Square, one of the things that we haven't been super pleased about is the fact that the rock stack doesn't come all the way up to the top of your eye line. And basically what this deprives us of is the opportunity to tuck in a lot of corals really at that main eye line. Like when you walk in, you'll see it right away, sort of, right at your head's height. And so what we're gonna do is go through, drop in a whole bunch of rocks and fill in this entire void right here. It's also gonna give us a ton of new places for the fish to explore, swim in and out of the rocks, and hopefully have some of those niche fish that live inside of the rocks a little more prominent and visible to everybody who comes into the museum.
But before we could start stacking rock on top of the old rock, we had to remove the corals that had been living there.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take off the first level of rocks and corals here. We're going to get those out of the way because we don't want to damage any of our livestock. And then we're going to start building with some flat rocks to have a building point. And then we're going to start taking some of these rocks down here. We're going to place all the flat ones down low and then stack up from there, build some nice walls and towers, lots of holes.
Tell me what you've done to prepare this rock to put it in the tank.
Sure, so this has been curing in our basement filtration for about 6 months now. So everything in here has all the bacteria, it's been in all the water that it's going into now. So I'm just keeping it wet and damp for the time being until we start placing it back in the water.
Tony Yang, one of the aquarists for Carlin Aquarium Systems, is our diver, and he would spend a lot of time in the aquarium today. Is it going to be hard to move around in the tank? What are the difficulties you're going to face?
So if there's current, usually you kind of float around and get blown around with the current. So I have these weights on. I have a steel back plate, and it kind of weighs me down. And so hopefully I'm stable and not flying around.
How hard is it going to be to sort of aquascape without kicking the corals and that kind of stuff that's already in there?
It's not too hard since I'm pretty weighted, so I'll be planted down in the rocks and I'll be able to walk around and stuff.
One of the things that we didn't account for, however, was the fact that those rocks had really bonded together over the nearly decade that they have been there.
It's just lifting the corals off the rocks.
Yeah.
They're all fused together. It was really hard to lift them off.
Are they heavy underwater?
Yeah, they're still pretty heavy underwater. Heavier than I thought. I thought it was gonna be light, but yeah.
How are the space constraints? Do you feel claustrophobic?
No, not at all.
Okay.
So, yeah.
But you're doing great. Looks good.
Thanks.
Right now, Tony is about halfway done getting the living corals out of the way. He's moved some of the heavy rocks, and we're getting closer to the point where we can start putting in the new rock. We basically had a whole pallet of what started out as dry reef rock that we had acclimated for half a year in the system. The hard part was getting it down to Tony in the tank so that he could build out exactly the way we wanted it. So we used a set of tongs that worked really well. It grabbed onto the live rock with no trouble, and we were able to use a 3-man system to lift it up and then lower it down to Tony where he could grab it when he needed it. The transformation in this aquarium was absolutely amazing. Immediately, it changed the whole dynamic of the tank. The way that the fish interacted with the reef, the way that the corals are eventually going to be displayed, the eye line that we had been concerned about brought it up to the level where the public could see it. Everything in the aquarium changed in our minds for the better, and the effect was instantaneous. We were really all amazed at the way the fish just surrounded that new rock and really looked to be interacting with it the way they do on a real reef in the ocean. So now the next step for us will be to add new coral to the aquarium. And yes, we'll be going for some colors, some greens and some reds, but mostly for a public aquarium, which honestly can only be managed just so much. I think it calls for large corals like hammers, frog spawns, torches, and Duncans, basically the Euphyllia corals, with polyps that visibly move in the current. We'll also be working on some small polyp stony corals to see if we can get them to take, but we do need species that aren't too fussy. Now, I hope to have another video soon where we'll have Tony back in the aquarium at Center in the Square, and you can watch and see as we plant the corals and then get to sit back and watch them grow out. I didn't mention it before, but Stephen had drilled holes in many of those pieces of rock so that we should be able to simply drop frag plugs into the reef with new frags in many places, and we're all very anxious to see how that turns out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next FinCast.